Welcome to another episode that's. Oh, wow. Here we go. Okay, this time for real. Welcome! No, start over. Welcome to another episode of the TheatreQs podcast. As always, I am your host, struggling to say the intro, Nate Wiley. I just got back from a wedding up in Phoenix, and I was chatting with some of my relatives about shows that are amazing to see on Broadway. I'm going to New York this summer with my family, so if you listeners have any suggestions, let me know. I'm always open to them. But I'm here blabbering on about things when we should really be getting into our theater fun fact for this month. So, let's hear it. I guarantee you that you've seen Hamilton on Disney+. If you haven't, I'm not singling you out, but go watch it. It's amazing. If you have watched it, though, you know that it has a revolving stage. You may be wondering, how did the revolving stage get to Hamilton? Here's a brief history. According to Britannica, the revolving stage began in the 1700s. It was initially created for a Japanese theater, but in the late 1800s, it was introduced into Western theater in Germany. This type of stage has gradually become more popular with productions like Hamilton using it on a Broadway stage. And it's also being used in some high school productions to help keep the show moving smoothly. My guest today has been in a wide variety of local productions, including Bright Star as Jimmy Ray Dobbs, Catch Me If You Can as Agent Carl Hanratty, and as Sam Carmichael in Mamma Mia. He is an incredibly talented singer, teacher, and performer, and I can't wait for you to hear our interview. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Rafael J. Acuña. All right. So first off, what are your greatest hits as far as your career goes, and how did you get your career started?
Well, it started in my junior year of high school. I had taken strength and conditioning, like weightlifting classes, up until junior year. Junior year, they make you pick like your top three, and
Mm-hmm.
theater was like my third choice. Everything else was full. I ended up taking the intro to theater class, and it seemed like something that I could finally have fun with and be good at. And they were also doing their once every other year musical that particular, or not that year, but the year after that. And I fell in love with doing musicals after that, and it was like the first time that I'd ever tried to sing in front of anybody. And that was Little Shop of Horrors, and that's probably a highlight. Since then, it's been Mamma Mia. I enjoyed that a lot. Catch Me If You Can. That was probably one of my favorites, too. Ragtime. Chess. Was Freddy and Chess. That was a lot of fun being rude and mean. Yeah. It's probably the bigger ones, or the ones that I've had the most fun with, I suppose.
Cool. And you work with Stories That Soar, which is a part of Literacy Connects. So when did you start there, and how has that impacted your career as an actor?
That was in 2017, I think. It was right after I graduated. A friend of mine that I had acted with in college mentioned the open audition that they were having at the time, and I showed up and I got cast in their ensemble of actors. And I've been not participating as much lately, but initially I was really in there because it's devised theater. Yeah, I suppose some background for Stories That Soar, if somebody doesn't know. It's a show that gets performed for children at their school, featuring stories that they themselves wrote and that the actors turned into like 3 or 4 minute long skits. Um, so that in and of itself, promoting literacy and promoting the arts was a very positive impact on me in as far as like motivation goes. But also,
Mm-hmm.
devised theater of that nature is probably one of the best things you can do for your acting performing technique, because so often you have to just immediately switch out of one thing into the next character, into the next scene. You have to be really
Mm-hmm.
quick and you have to be really ready to adapt at any given time. Um, I would say that I wouldn't be as potentially apt and as ready of a performer without stories that soar, for sure.
And you mentioned how you perform for students, but you also have taught young actors. So, what for you is the best part about teaching those young actors and mentoring them?
I like the breakthroughs in the process when somebody can finally latch on to what's being asked or finds their groove, um, with whatever role or place they need to um, take part in at that given time. Um, it's acting is such a soft science, and I believe it's a very inherent thing. I meet people all the time that just kind of will bust out a random character, and it's like, oh wow, that was really, I believed it. That could be you for all I know, and yeah. Um, so seeing that finally click for these younger minds that are like still learning and developing and maybe not having the same perspective, as like an older actor.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting to see it finally work for somebody, or to see the kind of like new choices that they make, where me being 10 plus years older than most of them are being like, wow, that was I have to use that or implement. That's definitely happened a couple times, for
Did
sure.
you see yourself in any of the students, like when you were first starting out? Do because yeah, I'd imagine that maybe you would.
um Not specifically, to be honest. I see little bits and pieces, um but not one specific person where I'm like, wow, that's so. Maybe if there was more video of
Hmm.
me, or if I had talked to maybe some of my old, like the people I acted with in high school, to see what their perspective was on that.
Yeah.
Um, because at the time, I know for me, I was just having fun, and it was fun to, like one of the very first things I did on stage is that I was an old man who, you know, whose whole existence was just to tell 3 or 4 fart jokes. And to me, that was awesome. Um, and this was a part of why I kept going with it in the first place, is that it was fun to take part in these things. Um, that being said, I I thinking back at it now, I know that I was probably kind of ridiculous, or not giving it my entire effort or entire perspective that I possibly could. Um, and I see that in some of the high schoolers I work with.
Mm-hmm.
But I see a little bit of the willingness in some of the live theater workshop summer camps. There's I don't know how old he was then or how old he is now. He's probably like in second or third grade. His name is Max, and maybe he didn't have the right instincts at maybe half of the time, but he was always funny. Maybe it wasn't appropriate, maybe it wasn't the right choice for the scene, but he was always so ready to be funny. The willingness, I suppose, because a lot of people maybe aren't as willing as Max was, and I was like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Max, that's great that you're totally willing just to do something as opposed to just standing there or something like that.
You mentioned actors' instincts. How did you grow your actors' instincts over time?
Um, Stories that Soar was like probably the biggest. part of that. Having to work um, very quickly and on your feet at any given time, um, and also just doing as much as possible and
Mm-hmm.
gaining or taking more opportunities to gain more perspective on multiple aspects of life. Like anything else, the more you actually do and the more you actually practice, the better you'll become at it. And so the rapid fire work of Stories That Soar and the taking any opportunity that I could get to do whatever, as long as I was doing something in front of people, was because there's probably like a 1.3% of influence from the time that I worked at like Fry's in the deli, because that was like one of my first jobs where I really had to like have a demeanor with people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely some of that still exists in the way that I approach performing now, for sure.
Does any of that thinking on your feet, has that ever helped you in a show? Have you ever found yourself in an instance where you're like, oh,
All the time. Um, Especially because if you're dealing with a show where maybe the instincts like maybe your fellow actors are like not as seasoned or something to that extent, the mistakes that can sometimes come up, or the I'm gonna like jump 5 lines and all of a sudden we're in the next scene, um, that like I'm ready for it at any given time. It's maybe not gonna be the best like version of whatever happened, but I'm so ready just to be as adaptive as possible and to just roll with whatever happens, for sure.
one of my favorite memories of rolling with something is I did 5 years ago now. I did the Music Man at ATC, and I had this jar of worms that I was supposed to throw underhand to one of the other actors on stage.
Hmm.
Well, I threw it underhand, and it went completely over her head and into the wings. And there was just a moment where the entire audience gasped, and it was definitely awkward for me, but fortunately, the other actors on stage had those instincts to pull, 8 or 9 year old me through that
Yeah,
without breaking.
but that's kind of the beauty of live theater, isn't it? Too, is the things that could happen. It's
Mm-hmm.
I feel when it's not when it all goes according to plan, that's when it gets the most like mundane. But when things like that happen, that's what makes it so special. And so I would say, if anything, that was probably the highlight of the Music Man on that particular night.
I guarantee you it was.
I believe it.
So you've worked with a lot of different theater companies here in Tucson. So how do you adapt to the preferences of different directors and creative staff and those different environments that you have to work in?
Hmm. Um, Most of my take with that is that I'm, because in most theaters you're a contractor, and if
Mm-hmm.
you take that down to what most people would think of as a contractor, it's you're there to have the tools and to put together the thing that they want. So maybe 50% of that is what is in your head, what you already have and what you can already do. But, well, maybe not even 50%. I would say that's maybe like 30 to 40, because the rest of it is just what the director is willing and capable, um, willing and ready to shape you into. So, at least for me, it's not as much like, oh, I have to like this person's directorial style, like it's going to be a whole ordeal getting used to them or whatever. It's, to me at least, this is the biggest part of it, is just listening to what that person wants, and I can't get attached to any one particular thing that I do. It's all has to be um, in service of the original creator. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what was the name of the show that we did, Nate? It was something hike.
Take a hike.
Take a hike. Yeah. Um, I'm sure you remember to some extent, but that was, and I think it was in your Instagram, um, little post because I followed you just today actually.
Yeah.
Um, the costume I had to wear as the Roadrunner.
Yes.
Like at that point, I was already pretty used to being ridiculous, but that was like the silliest I ever felt. But it's not. It's not about how I feel. It's not about like, oh God, this is a little bit depressing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's about what does the director want, and the director really liked it. You know, she was like cackling when I first like put it on for the photo shoot. So I was like, that's why it needs to exist as it is, just so she can enjoy it. Because the idea being, the director is making the choices that they believe and might know that the audience is going to want. So, um, yeah, I don't think about it as terms of like. Of course, there obviously is like you're working with another individual in an artistic setting, but to me, theater is like the most jobby of creative outlets. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like writing my own music or like painting my own portrait. It's
Yeah.
there's a book, there are rules, there's things I need to do. So it's part of it is that you're listening to somebody else's vision and you know can't get too hung up on anything else.
I
Oh,
just recently I saw that the helmet that you had to wear, the bicycle helmet. I think it's
oh
still in
yeah.
the the shop at LTW somewhere.
Yeah, oh, yeah, well, all the little pieces were great. Yeah, I'm obviously glad that they kept that because that was a neat little thing and that could be used in so many other things for
Mm-hmm.
sure. That's great.
So, what's it like for you to make a living, or at least part of a living, off of acting, and how do you do that in a small market like Tucson?
Um, you definitely have to be picky, choosy, with the things that you do. Um, I, and well, it's finding your groove, the situations you're willing to work with, the contracts you're willing to work with, um, obviously the people to some extent, um, and between the theaters that I've worked with the most thus far, being Stories That Soar and Live Theater Workshop and Arts Express, they are easily the most equitable when it comes to, pay and being upfront about it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, for sure. And not giving yourself too much because every part of me wants to just to do everything. Like I, they asked me to do hair at Arts Express. That's I had all the dates pulled up for these shows so I can mention them. Hair is gonna happen at Arts Express. I think March 15th. Yeah, March 15th is the first weekend for hair. Um, but you know, I have this new job where I have to be at work every day at like 7:15 in the morning, and
Oh,
going because the other show I'm doing in the Heights starts like while that show is running, so it would be months of
oh
just
man.
yeah, like averaging 4 to 5 hours of sleep, which I would prefer not to do, and with like commutes and whatnot, it's a real because ultimately, if you're doing in theater in Tucson, it is you're sacrificing that time and um, how like you're sacrificing that time just like baseline
Yeah.
because you want to do it. But Arts Express is comparable with their conversation and Live Theater Workshop and Stories that Soar, of course. So finding, I guess the short answer to this long tangent I led us on um, is not too much, you know, be particular. Um, make sure you agree with everything. You're not just doing something just because it's there and you can. You know.
Yeah, I talked about that in the last episode with Zach Wetzel a little bit. I don't know if you know him. He's worked at LTW
Oh yeah.
before.
I did ragtime with Zach, and I did Descendants with Zach.
Oh
Um,
yeah, that's
I did
right. I
Bright Star
forgot.
with Zach. Oh yeah, of course. I know Zach.
uh, but yeah, he was talking about how he wants to start slowing things down because going,
Oh yeah.
back to back to back with shows is just it's difficult. It's taxing.
Yeah, and yeah, and especially with Zach too, because he's like a salary employee at a I don't know what school, but he works at a school as a choir director. So yeah, it's the amount of time he probably has to put in outside of that for his actual job. Additionally, all this work that he has to put in for everything else. It's a massive tax, and you want to like do a whole lot, and it's fun to do a whole lot. It would have been really fun probably to do hair. Um, but if you're gonna run yourself into the ground, you're not really gonna be able to do anything. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, along with that, you are an amazing singer, which I'm sure is why you're wanted for a lot of musicals. So, how do you go about maintaining your vocal health amidst, doing various shows?
um, I you can feel, you're aware, or at least you should be aware of when you're harming or overusing your voice. Um, and that's a big part of it, especially now with the job that I have, where a lot of my job is just making sure people can hear me, yelling over students in classrooms and lunchrooms and whatnot. Um, if it's uncomfortable, if it hurts, just don't do it. you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, plenty of like vocal rest. When I did chess, um, one of the the lead actress in the show, she is a speech pathologist at the
Oh,
U of
really?
A. So she gave me a bunch of like, little. There's a lot of things that maybe a lot of like singers or anyone who uses their voice a lot, techniques that they know about, but give yourself little massages, little like breath exercises that you can do with like straws and just your voice as it is. Um, just being as knowledgeable as possible and being aware of what you're doing to your voice at any given time. Um, because not for nothing, outside of theater and work, I try to keep it mellow. I'm not somebody who's
Mm-hmm.
like screaming or partying all the time. So relaxed. Try to remain relaxed at least. Don't overwork it.
So the roles that you have played have been really varied in many different ways, children's theater versus main stage theater, different genres of theater, all sorts of things. So how do you approach going from, a very joyful like roadrunner in a children's theater show at LTW to a more serious role?
Um, yeah, that is the thing, isn't it? Well, maybe not the most direct answer to that question would be is that regardless of the situation, regardless of the context or the flavor of the story that you're trying to put forward, um, you need to be true to the reality of the character, whether it be serious or comedic or um, fantastical. That in the moment that you are playing them on stage or rehearsing with that character, you are them. They do exist, and
Mm-hmm.
one person, one person, regardless of how ridiculous, or one person, regardless of how straightforward, isn't going to be just the things that happen on stage. It's everything else too. So even if something as silly as the Roadrunner from can't remember the name of the show again.
Take a hike.
Take a hike. Yeah, I was gonna say Once Upon a Hike for some reason. I don't know why. It was Hike something. It's been 3 years since you said. Yeah, it's been like
It
three
has,
years
yeah.
since we did that show. Um, even as like silly as he was and as silly as he looked, he still exists. And so part of making that person real was making the decisions on what were they doing before, who do they exist as outside of the situations that are happening, what led up to this, etc. So every character still has the everyday truth to them. It would be a disservice to just be silly and goofy for the sake of being silly and goofy, and just as much as it would be a disservice to not put that same amount of thought into, if you were doing Chekhov or Shepard,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. So, if you don't mind, I like to play a game of some sorts with all of my guests. So I've invented a little game for us to play that's called Who's at the Door.
Okay.
So in this game, I'm going to knock on the door, and for our listeners, that's in air quotes because obviously I'm not at Raphael's house.
Yeah, we're not. We're not in the same. We're probably way across town, actually. So
Probably, yeah. So I'm gonna knock on the door in air quotes
okay.
and say a line or a song lyric from one of the characters that you've played in your career, and you'll have to tell me which character said it and what show they're from. If you get majority of them right, you win the satisfaction of knowing you won.
Oh man, I
Right? It's the best prize.
yeah, I like yeah. It's like being an artist in Tucson. It's like you got to do it. That's your reward, right? Maybe there's $20 here and there. This is I do like an info dump. I like this vessel is empty and I pour everything into it, but as soon as I need to move on to the next thing, I pour everything else out. So this is gonna be nigh impossible.
All right.
I don't know.
You ready?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So the first one is, so if tomorrow Santa's flown, the tree is down, and you're alone, I'm always here right by the phone.
Of course, that's Carl Hanratty, Agent Carl Hanratty, and Catch Me If You Can. Because I think, that was the last show that I did. So at least
Yeah.
I remember that much, at least, yeah.
All right. The second one is, buildings are like babies. You always know your own.
Oh, and I mentioned that one too. That was Sam Carmichael in Mamma Mia.
Ding, ding, ding. You got
Yeah.
two. You got two. You're
Oh,
on a
man.
roll. The another one is, once in every show there comes a song like this. It starts off soft and low and ends up with a kiss.
I might not remember that one, but it was actually um, on my Spotify For You. I had listened to that song recently
Mm-hmm.
because it's Sir Galahad from Monty Python's Spam-A-Lot.
Yep, indeed it is.
Yeah.
Another one is, look at what you've done to me. You've destroyed me. I can never go see her again.
um. Oh, okay. I remember now. Jimmy Ray, from Bright Star. I couldn't remember his name for a second. Um, if it was anything else, but that's the line that I always screamed. So I remember that one at least. Any other
All right,
lyric
and
I probably would.
I guarantee you this is going to be the most difficult. That was extremely sarcastic, by the way.
Oh,
It's
God.
but because it says it in the quote who you are. So if you don't get this, it is ice cold piragua, parcha, china, cherry, strawberry, and just for today, I got mame.
Okay. Um, let's see. That was 2016 when I played Jonathan Harker in Bram Stoker's Dracula. There's a scene where he's supposed to trick Dracula into, getting back into his coffin, and he's like, "Oh, I'll give you no."
You
It was
got
in the
it.
Heights. Yeah. It was totally. I got it totally correct. Yeah, it was the Piragua guy from In the
Yep.
Heights. Yeah, those. Yeah. Oh,
All
thank
right. Well,
God.
you
Yeah.
you successfully you won the satisfaction of knowing you won. You got all of them right.
I am pretty satisfied, actually, because I thought I was going to do much worse. How about that?
All right, so here's a couple of questions from some of our listeners that they
Oh, cool.
sent in.
Yeah, that's
All
looking
right, so
forward
this is from Quincy, and he says, have you ever played a character that some audience members have found edgy or objectionable, and how do you handle that attention?
to it. Yeah. Um, because I had to think about it for a second, because I'm trying to think if there was ever a character that I played that was intentionally so or unintentionally so, but I don't think so. I think everything was okay on that end, so thank God. But a lot of people come into Rent anticipating to not really like Roger, but I got a couple of good reviews for him. You know, because Rent Roger from Rent is like it's just a crybaby. You know, most of the time, it's difficult to sympathize with him until like the very end, of course. But no, Chess Freddie Trumper is in the American version of the musical where there's dialogue. It's not all just singing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he's brutal. There's a lot of like really like lines where you think, do they write this specifically so to get some kind of audience reaction or just so you wouldn't like him as much? He seems like cartoonishly like mean and evil. Um, there was a lot of gasps, like multiple lines in the show. But for me, that's as long as nobody's leaving, that's hilarious. That's like fun to me, and especially when it's something so ridiculous. So what it is, what it is. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. Um, maybe I don't like it either, but this is the job I'm doing at the current time, so we're all gonna have to deal with it or not. You can walk out. I'll still be here. So sorry.
The next question is from Olin, and he asked, did you always plan on becoming an actor?
Oh no. Um, in high school, I thought it was going to be like some kind of more STEM. I thought it was going
Mm.
to be in some kind
Mm-hmm.
of more STEM oriented field. Um, like I always thought that I might have been a pilot or something like that. It was just pure happenstance that I happened to get into that theater class and to really like it and to want to explore that avenue a little bit more. So, um, yeah, not until like I graduated high school was I like, yeah, this is for sure. I think what I'm gonna lead with, at least if people ask me who I am or what I do.
Did you ever during high school, pursue something more, take a lot of classes that pursued more of a STEM field?
Yeah, I was part of the Future Business Leaders of America for a couple years. It was like an in-school club um, because I had taken business forensics, which
Mm.
is as boring as it sounds. Maybe not to some people, but a lot of the class was just like balance these books, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to be here for 2 hours. Um, and forensic psychology was another really cool one too. Um, mm, so I guess more in like a science direction. Yeah, I definitely took I
Okay.
took psych, like advanced placement psych, forensic psychology, stuff like that. Um, mind oriented uh, studies.
Was your school big into theater? Like, was the theater department a big deal, or was it more focused on other academics?
We Shannon Kerstetter is our theater teacher. She is a really dedicated individual, and I feel without her, definitely not. Um, it wasn't like Sal Point or
Mm-hmm.
um, Catfoot or CDO, where at least when I was going, like when I was still in high school, and you would go to the Southern Arizona, um, what is that, acting festival? I don't remember at this point.
Uh,
Associate.
Festival of Theater.
Yeah, yeah. Like, um, you'd always know, like, oh, yo, this is these are the Ironwood Ridge kids. They're always good. Um, we were never that school, but I feel like we always put on a really good show because of how dedicated she was, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And another question, the last listener question, is from Andrew, and he says, "What has been the hardest thing about acting for you?"
Hmm. Um, all the individual little truths can sometimes be difficult to find. Um, and without that, the performance can really suffer. So finding exactly what makes somebody, finding the groove of what makes somebody operate in the ways that they do is easily the most time consuming and the most difficult thing, because so easily it can be not exactly correct, but it
Mm-hmm.
works. There have been plenty of shows I've done where I've said to myself, like, this easily could have been much more thought out, but I just couldn't find what I um, find the thing that I would be happy with. Um, like countless performances that I've done where I'm like, it works, but it's not exactly what I thought, what I think would be the most truthful and the most honest, and therefore the most committed.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever? We talked about earlier how I asked if you see yourself in any of your students. Have you ever learned from any characters about, how to better yourself as a person and an actor?
Oh yeah. Um, yeah. The theater I've done was probably a part of a lot of the growing up that I did, is just the um, the trials that some of these people have had to go through, and the perspectives that the whole show has given me. Um, I can't remember the name of the character right now, but Vershinin in Three Sisters. It's a Chekhov play. Um, Chekhov being, like, famously wordy and
Mm-hmm.
philosophical was was a good one for me. Because that helped me really like hone my crafts, but also it was interesting to take on all these little philosophical standpoints. Um, Definitely, I would say I'm struggling now to find like a more exact um, representation of that, but easily, easily.
All right, and now I'm going to move us into the last segment of the episode, which I like to call the Theater Threes, where I ask the same three questions to each one of my guests. So the first question is, what is your favorite musical?
Cabaret. I love cabaret. It's like the perfect combination of music to book. Um, and I'll say to staging too. If you're thinking about the Sam Mendes one, it's like perfect. Such a good
Have
show.
you ever been in Cabaret?
No, I really want to. And they did it at Pima, but maybe this isn't going to sound the greatest, but I don't do a lot of things for free these days. And that's for, like, Pima's for people that are learning, and not that
Yeah.
I don't feel as if I need to learn anymore. Obviously, we all need to keep learning as long as we possibly can, but
Mm-hmm.
that's for them, and everything else is for me. So yeah, didn't take up that opportunity, but that was close.
The second one is, what actor did you look up to as a kid and why?
I really liked the Christian Bale Batman movies, you know? And
Yeah.
part of that was like, this guy is so cool. I'm going to like look more into the things he has done. And I watched a lot of movies just solely because he was in them. Christian Bale, I mean. And I watched a lot of good movies because of it, and I got to see a lot of really good performances from, like, one of the most versatile actors out there.
Definitely, yeah. He
Yeah.
is. He's
He's,
just amazing.
yeah, versatile, very
Yeah,
versatile.
very.
Yeah.
And the third and final question of the Theater Threes is: what advice do you have for theater kids or anyone wanting to get into theater?
I think about this every now and then, and it's so difficult to say exactly what that advice would be because to some extent I myself still kind of feel like that theater kid, and it's like you want me to give advice to as if like I'm not no longer like a theater kid. It's difficult to be like I don't know, do your best. uh but harkening back to like a couple things I guess I said before is to not burn yourself out, but to do as much as you can and or gain as much perspective as you can. um I feel it's a mistake to pigeonhole yourself into like one ideology or to one viewpoint because no one character is going to think exactly like the other. There's like this massive pool of perspectives and choices that can come from those perspectives given all the characters that exist in the world. So the more little things you can try, the more new experiences you get, the more um, obviously be safe and be careful, but like the more chances you take, um, really the better you make your performances. Some of the best actors I feel like were never strictly just actors; they were something else beforehand, and a lot of that perspective gave them, um, the more rich, dedicated experience and performances that they put out,
Mm-hmm.
but just through doing more and having more experience, travel, take chances, volunteer, do as much as you can outside of the world of performance art so you can all bring that back into performance art.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you so much. It was uh,
Well, thank you.
it was great to talk to you. Yeah, it's super interesting, and you know a lot. So thank you for
Oh man,
sharing that.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Nate. It was really nice to like get that email from you, and I was very happy to do it. Um, Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rafael. It was a pleasure to chat with you. You can go see Rafael In the Heights at Arts Express in Tucson from April 19th through May 5th. If you are a theater kid or a theater kid at heart and are interested in submitting a question for our next episode, you can shoot us an email with your question to TheatreQs at NateWileyProductions.com. For updates on who will be on our next episode, follow me at Nate the Theater Great on Instagram. Thank you all so much for listening today. TheatreQs is produced by Nate Wiley Productions and me, Nathaniel Wiley, featuring music by Joyheads. Joyheads is a Pasadena-based music group composed of Juan Gomez, Daniel Johnson, and Jeremy King. The song that you heard in this episode is A Real Good Time. If you like what you hear on the podcast, follow the podcast and check out our website, NateWileyProductions.com, for a wide variety of content, from historical series to photo galleries and much, much more.